As the country is staring down the barrel of yet another austerity budget, you'd like to believe that the government would do everything it could to incentivise growth and cut red tape to get the economy growing again, wouldn't you? Oh, I'm Alex Armstrong, and this is GBN Originals. But alas, no, Labour is at it again. Another day, another daft idea dressed up as progress. This time, they're dressing up new ethnicity pay reporting as some kind of equality win, when actually all they're going to do is to achieve racial division in your business. Let's cut through the spin, shall we? They want big companies, any firm with over 250 people, to comb through payrolls, slice everyone up by race and disability, and report on who earns what. Full transparency, they're calling it. Mandatory ethnicity pay gap reporting. Yep, you heard that right. Your boss, who should be running a business, now has to play identity politics accountant, tallying up who's black, who's white, who's brown, and how much each group earns. And if the numbers don't match up to some utopian ideal, well, cue the outrage, the finger wagging, and the inevitable cries of systematic inequality. Yes, Labour wants you to believe there's some kind of grand injustice lurking in every payroll. Their solution? Well, let's turn workplaces into racial battlegrounds, shall we? Force businesses into a never-ending game of diversity bingo, instead of, just hiring the best person for the job. This isn't fairness, is it? It's just division, plain and simple. And while they're busy stirring this up, they're ignoring the real scandal, the absolute state of our economy. Let's talk about GDP per capita. Well, it's down, isn't it? Productivity, flatlining. Wages, suppressed. Why? Because for decades we've been importing cheap foreign labour on a massive scale. And the stats don't lie. We opened the doors, let millions in to work for peanuts, and then what happened? The British worker got shafted. And employers loved it at the time. Cheaper staff, less need to train people up, bigger profits. But for working class Brits, well, it's been a race to the bottom, hasn't it? And now, instead of tackling that, Labour's solution is this. More red tape, more bureaucracy, more division. Please, give me a break. Give the country a break.
Using the internet without a VPN, a virtual private network, is a bit like taking to the road without car insurance. All it takes is one unlucky moment to cost you a lot of cash. This video's sponsor is Private Internet Access. They are the VPN to help keep you safe. Click the link in the description below to find out why over 30 million people have downloaded PIA to protect themselves online. A virtual private network is an app that hides your IP address and helps keep your data private. When you're browsing the internet at home, you give up a large amount of data to businesses, to shops, and indeed to social media giants too. Hackers have the ability to steal your personal data with ease, including sensitive information such as passwords, keystrokes, and even your personal photos. Private Internet Access helps protect your personal data by encrypting your internet connection to keep your data out of the hands of cyber criminals. And it's not just hackers either to be concerned about. Information can be censored too. When Canada passed their C-18 bill, social media giants decided to ban news content on their platforms. But PIA can protect your ability to consume the news and content you love. Private Internet Access is available for Windows users, Mac OS, Android, Linux, iOS, and you can use one PIA subscription to protect an unlimited amount of devices. And we've got a huge GB News discount for you too. Click the link in this video's description and you'll get a massive 83% off PIA. That's under £2 a month, the price of a coffee, and you'll get an extra 4 months completely free on top. Also, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee too. Visit piavpn.com/GB News to start protecting yourself digitally today.
Think about how insane this is. You work hard, put in the same graft as the next bloke, and now Labour wants your employer to pick apart your background, shove you in a spreadsheet, and check for disparities. And if the number doesn't quite look right, What's next? Quotas? Fining businesses for not being diverse enough? Firing people based on their skin colour? Paying people more based on their skin colour? Because that is inevitably where this leads. We're not talking about equal opportunity anymore. We're talking about social engineering of our economy. And here's the kicker. Businesses are already drowning. Tax hikes, energy bills through the roof. Inflation is hammering them. Now, on top of all of that, they've got to worry about ticking every identity box under the sun. It's absolute madness. Big corporations, well, they'll be fine. They'll just offshore more work, sack a few more people, or hire another overpaid diversity consultant to tell them what to do, won't they? Well, let's talk about real workers, shall we? The people who are actually keeping this country running. Warehouse staff, builders, delivery drivers, nurses, people who graft every day just to get by, living paycheck to paycheck. They work side by side. They don't care about each other's race. But shove this woke nonsense in the bill, and suddenly it's division everywhere. Suspicion, resentment, workplace tension, all manufactured by clueless politicians who, let's face it, some of whom have never worked a real day in their lives. Notice how it's always British workers who have to be held accountable for disparities. We're always the ones told we're privileged, that we need to check our biases in our system, and that somehow it's rigged in our favour. Meanwhile, the real reason wages are stagnating is mass migration has flooded the economy with cheap labour, and that argument constantly gets swept under the rug by the established elite. Mass migration drives wages down. That's a fact. We know that now. Then Labour turns around and shouts, inequality. They create the mess and then use it to push their own agenda. And meanwhile, the real problems, border control, skills training, proper investment in British workers, get ignored. And what about the next generation? You, your children, your grandchildren. A young 16-year-old who wants to learn a trade, for example. Well, he's not asking for handouts. He just wants a fair shot. But why would businesses bother training him when they can just hire someone cheaper from abroad? Labour don't want to fix that. They're not even putting a number on migration. Instead, they'll introduce yet another fairness scheme that does nothing but make everything worse. So who's benefiting from all of this? Well, it's definitely not the low-paid workers in our society. It's definitely not the businesses. So who are the winners? Well, there are only really one or two. The only winners are professional grievance mongers, HR departments, overpaid diversity officers, DEI civil servants, and activists who get paid, let's face it, to be offended for a living. They need these pay gaps to exist because if things actually got better, let's face it, they'd be out of a job, wouldn't they? Then there was a time when Britain actually invested in its own people. The 1950s, the 60s. Apprenticeships, technical schools, real training. Businesses built their workforces from within. Now, well, they're just bringing in cheap labour, cutting corners, and the government just lets them get away with it. In fact, it openly encourages it. And when that leads to pay gaps, instead of fixing the root of the problem, Labour and this government, and successive Tory governments as well, blame you. And don't think it stops here. What happens when reporting pay gaps isn't enough? Well, the activists will demand action, won't they? First reporting, then diversity targets, and then straight up racial quotas. If we don't stop now, we're going to be sleepwalking into hiring people based on skin colour instead of skill. It's not justice, it's not equality, it's not fairness, it's lunacy. There used to be a time in this country where we hired people based on their merit, not on their background. Well, let's be clear. In my opinion, this bill is going to be a disaster for Britain. It's divisive, it's impractical, and it's a gift to the diversity industry. More jobs for HR bureaucrats, more power for the woke mob, and yet another kick in the teeth for hard-working Brits. We don't need racial bean counting in this country. We need borders under control. We need sustainable migration policies, and we need wages to go up and an investment in our own people. Labour and the Tories both need to wake up. The game's up now. Scrap this nonsense and start listening to the people who actually built this country, not the ones tearing it apart. Labour and the Tories have had this same policy of importing mass migration, cheap labour from overseas. And unfortunately, it is making the country poorer, not wealthier. We need to focus on sustainability and making a country that is good for everybody. This has been Alex Armstrong for GBN Originals. Don't forget to subscribe to the GB News channel for more.